All right, so yesterday we talked about the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution and how it started in Great Britain. And this was because of all the agriculture advances, the growth of the cities, the growth of population, and they needed to keep up with the demand of these goods. So they started to look for other ways and these new inventions using machines and using changes in order to mass produce these things. Remember, this was really significant because this was the first time in over like 2,000, 3,000 years that people are actually going to start to use machines to get things done. So the Industrial Revolution was this time of rapid growth during the mid 1700s where people started to use machines to grow. One of the first things that we talked about was the textile industry and how they were able to create this thing called the water frame, and it helped them make threads so they can make cloth and keep up with the demand. And because of this all happened in Great Britain, but eventually it's going to get to America, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we start, let's go ahead and review from yesterday. So number one, how did machines speed up textile manufacturing? So the first machine that we talked about yesterday was the water pump or the water frame. So the water frame, the way it sped up processes is that people didn't have to spin the cotton on its own to make the threads. So the water frame produced dozens of cotton threads at the same time, whereas people before could only produce one thread at a time. So they start to do multiple jobs at once. Number two, in what ways might life for workers change as a result of the Industrial Revolution? So this is kind of like an inference, kind of your opinion. So the changes that might happen to the worker's life is maybe they're going to stop working on farms or in their homes and start working in factories. Some of them might lose work to some skilled laborers, and they're probably going to start to experience some poor working conditions, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Number three, what was the result of increased demand for manufactured goods in Great Britain? So the traditional methods, remember, most people were making it in their homes, and the traditional manufacturing methods could not meet the demand of this growing population or the demand that people wanted. So people started to develop these machines to help them make more materials or clothing more efficiently and quicker. So today we are going to talk about some new machines and how these new machines that were created and why they were created for the Americas, and how the Industrial Revolution came to America and it was used by some spies. So we'll go ahead and talk about that today. So new machines encouraged the rise of new processes in business and in manufacturing. As the machines used to make products became more efficient, the processes involved changed dramatically. So this is just like in real life. As things become more efficient or we create these new machines that can do things faster, things start to change. Just think about like the robots that are now taking people's orders at McDonald's and things. Things and processes are changing. Now you can just go and order things online. And this is how machines have changed today. So let's go ahead and look back and how things changed back then. So before I start talking about this slide, take a look at the picture. Can you see anything suspicious? Maybe see 3 cats? Try to look for them. But anywho, we're going to talk about Slater and his secrets. So this new textile machines allowed Great Britain to produce cloth faster and cheaper than any countries could, and they were the first ones to do it. To protect the British industry, the British Parliament or their government made it illegal for skilled mechanics or machine plants to leave the country. So they wanted to keep it a secret because if everyone found out, then everyone would be on the same boat, and they didn't want that. So, disguised as a farmer, Samuel Slater, a skilled British mechanic, immigrated to the United States after carefully memorizing the designs of textile machines in Europe or in Great Britain. Soon after arriving, he sent a letter to this guy named Moses Brown, who owned a textile business in New England. Slater claimed that he can improve the way textiles are manufactured in the United States. So Moses was really curious, and he set up a meeting with Slater. So Brown had one of his workers test Slater's knowledge of machinery. Slater passed. Brown's son, Smith Brown, and his son-in-law, William Almy, formed a partnership with Slater. So in 1793, they opened their first mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and the production of cotton thread by the American machines had begun. Slater ran the mill and the machinery, and he was confident that his new machines would work. So Samuel Slater, he kind of stole the ideas, memorized what they were doing in Britain, immigrated to the United States, started his own business because he thought maybe he could make some profit off it. And he found these partners, the Browns, and they actually started to make and use this new technology that they were using in Britain. So when Slater started to build these new machines and put them into these new textiles mills, they soon realized that his machines worked and the Pawtucket mill became a success. Slater's wife also invented a new cotton thread for sewing. In 1798, Slater formed his own company to build a mill. By the time he died in 1835, him and his wife, they owned about 13 different textile mills. Other Americans began building textile mills. Most were located in the Northeast or in the North, because remember, in the North, they're all about manufacturing. In New England in particular, merchants had the money to invest in these new mills. More importantly, this region had many rivers and streams that provided the reliable supply for power. Remember that the first machines that were built were using water. So if you look at the picture, you can kind of see how the water flows, the river flows, and it turns that mill or turns the wheel, and it turns everything else in the building. So this is how water power was used. So this region had North America, or the New England or the North, had a lot of rivers, and it was perfect for people to start to build their mills. Fewer mills were built in the South because the people in the South still concentrated on only expanding agriculture, and agriculture was the easiest way to be making money in the South. But one thing that you need to know is that a lot of these textile mills were built by rivers and built by streams, all because of the water power that they needed. So it took a while for everything to get some speed in the United States. So even though they brought these great changes and these new changes to the textile mills, most manufacturing was still done by hand. That was just what they were used to, and that's what that was normal for them. But in the late 1790s, the U.S. government worried about a possible war with France. So it wanted more muskets or more guns for the army. So what they did was they hired a bunch of these skilled workers, and these skilled workers made the parts for each weapon by hand. No two parts were exactly alike because everyone was making them on their own, and this caused a lot of problems because putting these pieces together took a lot of time and a lot of skill, and if a part broke, you couldn't really replace it with another type of part because every gun was made differently. As a result, American gun makers could not produce the muskets quickly enough to satisfy the government's demand. So factories needed to use better technology, and new tools were needed to be invented in order to produce the items for the demand of the U.S. So because of this, when they needed these demands and they needed these guns and everyone was making them differently, they needed to come up with a uniform way to get the creation or the supply of guns faster and quicker. So new technology was needed, and changes needed to be made at this moment, especially during the Industrial Revolution. So nowadays we think of interchangeable parts as a norm. Like if we break something on our iPhone, we can just take it into the store and we can replace the screen. Or we break some part of our parents' car and they can just go and fix it. Back then, that was not a thing. If you broke something, you had to buy something completely brand new because they couldn't fix it, because every item that was made was handmade and it was made differently. Until this guy came and he revolutionized everything, and his name was Eli Whitney. So in 1798, inventor Eli Whitney, he tried to address some of these problems. Whitney gave officials a proposal for mass-producing guns for the United States using water-powered machinery, so using the water that they had. So Whitney explained the benefits of his ideas to the government, and what he said was, we're going to reduce the labor, and when we reduce labor and start use manufacturing or machines, it'll make the production of these new tools a lot easier. So Whitney, he came up with this idea of using interchangeable parts, and this was parts that were made identical. So if you look at the picture, every gun would be made identical. Every part would be made identical, so they can be easier to assemble, and if things were broken, they can just go ahead and pick up the piece. This seems normal for us now, but back then it wasn't like that. Just remember that. So using interchangeable parts made machines easier to assemble the broken parts and easier to replace. Whitney promised to build about 10,000 muskets in 2 years. The federal government trusted him, and they gave him money to build his factory, and in 1801, Whitney was called to Washington, D.C. to give a demonstration. When Whitney stood in front of President John Adams and his Secretary of War, he had an assortment of 10 guns. He randomly chose parts and quickly assembled them into muskets, and the audience and everybody in the government was amazed that he was able to build these guns at such quick speeds and to pretty much change them, and if things were broken, he had a replacement. So Whitney had proven that the American inventors could improve on new British technologies. Machines that produced matching parts soon became a standard in the industry, and interchangeable parts sped up mass production or efficient production of a large number of identical goods. So because of Whitney's inventions and him creating interchangeable parts, the machines became a standard not only for guns but for a lot of other things, which we'll see now. And these making of interchangeable parts sped up mass production, or producing a lot of the same goods at a fast pace, or making it very efficiently. So as a quick review, we started to talk about how these new machines, they started to bring a change in business and manufacturing. At first, it was only in Great Britain until this guy named Slater came over, and he kind of stole the British idea. Remember, the British people, they kind of wanted to keep it a secret because they didn't want anybody else to do or steal their ideas. But when Slater came to America and brought his ideas of these manufacturing machines, it changed everything, and that's what was going on. So these machines started to change the way businesses and manufacturers worked, and most of them used water power at the time. During the time, the U.S. was kind of worried that they were going to go to war with France, and they needed a lot more supplies. Remember, the U.S. never really had enough supplies anytime they went to war, and they always relied on Britain for supplies. But this time, Eli Whitney said, you know what, let's go ahead and let's try to do something with all this new technology. Let's start to make guns with machines, because before, people were making guns by hand. It would take a really long time, and if something was to break, it would be really hard for them to replace the part, because everything was made individually and specific for that one gun. So when Eli Whitney decided that we needed to go ahead and use technology to change the way we manufacture things, he created this idea of interchangeable parts. And these interchangeable parts were pretty much parts that can be replaced if they're broken and easily fixed. And this was a breakthrough. This was the first time. It sounds crazy and bizarre that this was the first time they thought about it, but it really was the first time they thought about doing something like this. So when he created these things called interchangeable parts, the president started to see the benefits of using machines and the benefits of creating mass production, or making all the same things at a very efficient rate. And that kind of like sparked the Industrial Revolution in the United States. So for homework, I want you guys to answer these 3 questions. Number 1, how did Eli Whitney influence American manufacturing? So what did Eli Whitney do to encourage American manufacturing? Number 2, why were most American mills located in New England? Why were these mills located in the north or in this New England area? Think about their power sources. And number 3, how did the idea of interchangeable parts lead to mass production? So first off, know what interchangeable parts are, and then how did this lead to mass production?
Alright, so if you guys have any questions, please let me know. Send me an email or send me a message through Google Classroom. If you have any questions, I'm here to help you. If not, I will see you guys all tomorrow in our Zoom session at 10 a.m.